One of the things that has struck me on this most recent read through is that it's almost an inversion of the stereotype of the delta between the Gospels and the Epistles. As I got into the Gospels, the stereotype of the Gospels is like, well, Jesus, and he's all about love and grace and all these different things. And I'm going through it, and all I'm encountering in what Jesus is saying is like, oh my goodness, he was challenging people so hard against everything that they thought was important. He is challenging them. He's challenging those who thought themselves righteous. He's challenging sinners. He's challenging those who think, if I just give a little bit to God, that's good enough. He's challenging everyone to say, no, what I'm calling you to is you have to give everything. And you have to do it every day, and you have to not look back. And if you do, I promise you persecution in this life.
So welcome to A Sermon for One. Today I have a very special guest with me. He's a friend for many years and also somebody that I work together with. He has an awesome story to share with us from his background, the military, and then to the current industry that he's on. And people might think that it might be a little weird. Why do we have somebody from his industry in this podcast? But stay with us because this is going to be a good one. So my guest for today is Ben Carcich, and we've known each other for a couple of years, as I mentioned, and we are part of a Friday call where we have business people, leaders, Christian leaders, that we talk sometimes about nothing at all, but sometimes we go so deep that it takes a couple of hours before we end our calls. So welcome to A Sermon for One. Ben, I'm so glad that you made time to be with us today.
Happy to be here.
Awesome. There was I never told you this, but Ben here is a producer for game development. And he was invited by a friend of mine, John Kay. And when you joined our call, I do what I normally do, which is stalk people. So I went to LinkedIn, check what your background was, and because he said, I have somebody, a game developer that I would like to invite. And when I saw your experience and Riot was there, I was starstruck, to be honest. And the high level on Riot, mainly because aside from having my own business, aside from being a pastor, I also love games. So up to the level where I can afford the PC to run them, but I really love games. And League of Legends, which is part of your resume, was one of the games that we jumped right on after Dota 1. And that was legal. It was either League of Legends or Heroes of New Earth, and we just gravitated to League of Legends.
Yep.
And then when you joined, part of sort of the thing that we did with my company is that whenever I wanted to sort of have some time out or some activities with some of my employees, we would play Valorant, which is another game that you were working on. So that was when I saw, this Friday call is becoming something because we have Ben here. So
I don't know about that. A lot of people worked at Riot. Let's be fair. A lot of people worked at Riot.
Yeah, but back when you were working on League of Legends, is what much earlier when they started. So you were not there necessarily at the very very beginning, but definitely it was a much smaller studio at the time. But yeah, so Ben, if you could give us like an introduction as to who you are, because I'm probably just glazing you right now. So if you could give us your introduction, I'd love to hear that.
My name is Ben Carcich. I currently work in the leadership and production space of game development. I try to level up leaders. I think it's a huge opportunity in game dev. I also see it as a huge opportunity in many other spaces, but game dev is where I'm credible, so that's where I'm focused. Because through surprisingly little effort of my own, but a bunch of decisions that I probably didn't think through hard enough, I ended up regularly interacting with leadership, and that goes way, way back. But to sort of walk backwards through, for the last 5 years, I've been doing this consulting, training, coaching thing. For the about 8 years before that, I was at Riot from about late 2011 till beginning of 2020, and did a bunch of stuff there. Like you said, League of Legends, Valorant, but also production discipline development, a lot of interviews, and trying to understand what is it that makes leaders effective and not effective. And before that, I was in the military. I spent 4 years in the Army as an officer. Technically, I was trained in combat arms. I did more logistics once I was in, both stateside and deployed. And that was another opportunity where they focus a lot on leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that kind of runs me back. I technically have a computer and systems engineering degree, which I never really used. Similar to my combat arms training, never really used it. I'm pretty okay with both of those. And I kind of had to figure out everything else as I went. So that's how I got to here.
Awesome, awesome. Um, my my father used to be super angry with me because of gaming. And I think that he'd be very, very amused that that I'll have a somebody who created or helped create the games that he would turn off computers in computer shops because we can blame him. but uh, but how was that transition that you made from the military to gaming to go to Riot? Were you a gamer before? Like
Yes.
you wanted to be in game development, or was that just an opportunity that came around?
Well, it's a little bit of both. I'd been a gamer for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
I really enjoyed games from when I was little. Me and my brother played them extensively. We still play them regularly together. It's just a way that we engage with each other. And Um, we always liked more competitive games when we were younger. Now we're getting old, so we're getting a little bit more casual, a little bit more co-op, like not as much, Twitch-based stuff. But yeah, I've always liked games. And when I was leaving the military, I was looking for a job. I knew the job would probably relate to leadership because of my background in the Army. It might have related to my engineering degree, but that seemed less likely. And I was playing two games at the time, StarCraft 2 and League of Legends. And I was like, well, I don't really want to move to California, but what the heck? Let's send some resumes off and see if anybody gets back to me. And Riot did. At the
Mm-hmm.
time, the way I describe it is they needed leaders more than they needed game development expertise. And so I showed up, happened to be another veteran who was reviewing the resumes. So I think he was able to interpret mine.
Mm-hmm.
And he chanced a phone call to me and then kind of went through all the processes and ended up at Riot Games a few months later. It wasn't really a huge fan of California, but that was where they were, and this was sort of a dream job. So I dropped in, started working, just trying to figure out how things go. So that's how I ended up there. In terms of what that shift was like, it was pretty different.
Mm-hmm.
Leadership is true in every organization, but in the military, there's a lot more structure, and there's actually two different phases, two different sort of modes of operation. There's a lot more than that. Let's just simplify it down to two. In garrison, you're doing training. You're not in a
Mm-hmm.
war zone. Like there's a particular mode, and there's a lot of standard operating procedures and doing all the things and showing up at the right time and like there's ceremonial sounds not quite right, but I think there is that to it of like, yep,
Mm-hmm.
we're military. We make sure we look good. We're dressed right. Like we're professional. We do the right thing. All this different stuff. When you deploy, none of that goes away per se, but it shifts. You become very pragmatic. And so when you go into a leadership environment overseas, there is still a desire for professionalism, but now we all want to accomplish the mission, right? And
Mm-hmm.
one part of that mission is always, can we get everybody home safely?
Mm-hmm.
That's what we really like. Can we get, if we can get everybody home safely, let's do that. And then let's also see what we can do here to make a difference and do all these different things. Um, Honestly, there's an argument for that, like they should have that the other way around where like the mission is more important and then get everybody home safe. But when you're over there, you're kind of
Mm-hmm.
interested in like getting back home. And so you've got your mission, you do it. And again, it's very practical. There's a little bit less ceremony, a little bit more pragmatism. But in both, there is a very strong hierarchy from a leadership angle. There's a top-down flow of how information
Mhm.
moves. Now, there's obviously distributed decision making that happens because there are leaders at every single layer. But you'll tend to be operating inside of a system where like you don't have a ton of agency over what you're going to go do. And when you tell someone who is under your authority what to do, again, deployed, you might get if time allows, not in a combat situation, but if time allows, you might get somebody like pushing back or
Mhm.
saying, "Hey, I'm not sure that's right." But generally, it's going to be like, "Yes, sir. No, sir. Yes, sergeant. No, sergeant," and you're going to move on. Very, very structured. A little bit more pragmatism deployed, which you'd expect. A little bit more ceremony and appearance in the garrison side, but also like good training. Uh, and then I joined video game development, and
Mhm.
I'm a producer. And I don't know what a producer is because I've never done video game development before. I've played games, but I don't really know. So I show up and I just start trying to act like a leader as I also try to ask all the other producers, what is it that we do? Like, what does it
Mhm.
mean to be a producer? How do we do this well? And that was it was a mixed bag. Some things it worked really well. The
Mhm.
ability to step in and take a leader stance and go, what is going well and what is not going well in this environment, and how would I make it better? How do I overcome that problem? When I got to that space, it was often very positive. When I was in uh, the place where I struggled the most, I would say, was around how do I relate to the layers above me from a leadership
Mhm.
perspective? Because if I was in the military and somebody gave an order and I didn't do it or even did it, but hesitantly or with a little bit of a sneer or whatever, I could get in huge trouble.
Mhm.
At Riot, they wanted my pushback. They wanted
Mhm.
me to be willing to challenge authority if I saw things working in a way that they shouldn't, or if I got um, directed to do something that was not a good idea. They wanted my pushback, or they said they did. And for the most part, that's true. Not everybody, but like for the most part, people did want that pushback. They wanted, um, and people pushed back on me inside of my teams. They were not a bunch of uh, privates or junior sergeants or something where when I
Mhm.
told them what to do, they just did it, not thoughtlessly, but just like, okay, my default is I'm just going to go do that. Instead, the default was something like, is that a good idea? Let me think about that. And then if I think it is, I'll do it. And if I don't, I'll either I'll tell Ben that I think it's a bad idea, or I'll just not tell him and not do it. And then I'll figure out later. And so that agency down to the developer level in game development, and this isn't all game development. This was particular, I think, to Riot Games and some other studios, was quite a delta for me. And it worked. It hurt me in two ways. One, sometimes I would say, like, go do this thing, and then I would just expect it to be done, and it wouldn't work out that way. And they'd be like,
Mhm.
what went wrong? And they'd be like, nothing. This is just normal. Like, we didn't want to do what you said. I'm like, well, you're not allowed to do that. Well, yes, we are, right? Like, what are you going to do?
Mhm.
This is within our purview to dictate our own lives when it comes to work, unless if you think it's like a fireable offense or something. And I was sort of like, okay, got to recalibrate around that. And the other one was those leaders above me. I struggled immensely with giving them feedback,
Mhm.
with talking to somebody who was a layer above and saying, hey, I don't think that's a good idea. This is why. Here's what I might do instead. I knew these frames because in the military we had them. We just didn't tend to use them.
Mhm.
Like you were
Mhm.
sort of taught this sort of thing, but it had to be pretty severe before you'd go up to somebody, especially someone
Mhm.
particularly high ranking, and go, I don't want to do that. So those were some adjustments that were difficult for me that I spent some amount of time figuring out. The relationship to those on my teams was much easier than the relationship for me to those above. I have a
Mhm.
natural suspicion of leadership and authority. Again, great irony considering I've always been a leader. And that was, it can remain difficult for me to engage as honestly as I probably should with those I see as in positions of authority.
What would you attribute that the difference between the pushback being something encouraged in game development and not only game development in corporate sort of people sort of want to do that? Is it possible that it's because there's so many vertical expertise that you have where people are extremely experts on this specific subject, and the person that's above them is always not necessarily the expert or even versed in some of those things. So that means that they sort of feel that they have more credibility to push back. And that sort of, for example, in my own business, I have graphic designs, actual graphic designers working for me, actual video editors, and we at the management level and with clients would have like people say, can you do this and do this and have this asset move like this, and we get pushback from our video editor to say, yeah, but you'll have to create that asset. So it's not going to be the 30 minutes that you think it's going to be just to make that motion. It's going to take a long time to do that, to render it, to build it in After Effects. So is that something that that is there? Because the military has also vertical expertise, right? In terms of
It does.
yeah.
Yeah. The thing I would actually attribute it to more, when things go really badly and you end up in chaos, and that happens in the military, the expectation that everybody will get a say in what we choose to do in that moment would be absurd. If everybody did whatever they wanted, a lot of people would probably die. And it's not to say that the leader or the person who makes the call, who's sometimes not even the most formally high-ranking leader, it might just be somebody who feels like they have the best view of the situation. A simple example: I am I'm doing a mission. I'm the lead. I'm the staff sergeant in charge of the forward element. There's a platoon sergeant behind me who outranks me, and there's a lieutenant behind me that outranks me. We hit contact. I have the best view of what's happening, so I make calls. Now, technically, the platoon sergeant could counteract that. But this is actually coming back to what I think the real reason is. Assuming they think I'm a good staff sergeant, odds are when I make a call and say, okay, this element start providing suppressing fire, this element, move over there, whatever it is, right? Whatever I start giving my direction to get my people going in the way that they want, or in the way that I want, that platoon sergeant's unlikely to counteract unless if they feel that they have a significantly more, or they know something I don't know, and that gives them a better view than I have of the battlefield. And you have to be really careful as you do that. And the same thing for the platoon sergeant to the lieutenant, right? Because they might be in conversation about we started taking kind of how are we going to move, blah, blah, blah. And again, those conversations are very short and very fast. And if everybody that was there was like, what should we do, guys? And we all started having a conversation about it, we'd all get shot. All right, and we wouldn't move in time. And so some of it relates to, in the military, when things go really bad, that structure and discipline around listening to the leader above you is much more important than in game dev, because people die if we don't do that. And you might say, well, yeah, but maybe someone has a really great piece of feedback that you're going to miss. Correct. That's the risk you take being in that authoritative model. But that authoritative model is also very appropriate often in that environment. If you were to okay, would I rather have a bunch of distributed deciders, all figuring out what they want to do when we get ambushed, versus I want someone who everybody knows is going to make a call and they're going to follow that call. And if that person gets shot, I know who the next person is that they're going to follow to make the call, and et cetera, down the entire chain of command. You want the second, because I think maybe it was Patton, the good plan executed with violence beats the perfect plan every time. I'm paraphrasing there. I don't remember the exact quote. So that's one element to it, is in the military, you want the culture to be one where when things go really bad, we behave correctly, because if we're sub-optimizing for the other environments, that's okay. Those are less lethal environments. One element. Second element that I think comes into play here, because there is a little bit of the expertise, but like you said, there are verticals in the military, and often there are a lot of people inside of, let's say you're a captain and you have a company, there may be a lot of people with a lot of specialized expertise inside of that company that the captain doesn't have their particular expertise. They're not a medic, or they're not whatever it is. So again, we still want some openness. If the captain says something ridiculous, oh, go do this with the radio equipment, and the signal person's like, we can't, that doesn't make any sense, we can't do that. But it has to be a much faster conversation. And so the second element is actually trust. The military is not, by design, a trustful organization to every individual within it. And that sounds really bad, and I don't think it is. Because people are like, what? You don't trust your people? You do, but you trust them. It's how much you trust them. And so when I hire somebody as Riot Games, I believe I'm hiring an expert, highly capable in whatever their expertise is, who has potentially made games before or has a lot of expertise, like you said, that I might not, and knows how to do this particular thing. And I've hired them based on their culture fit and their focus on players and like alignment to our overall vision as a company. You know, we aspire to be the most player-focused game company in the world. They're bought into that. I have a bunch of trust I give to them. And actually, if they break that trust, I fire them. Like if they not once, but like if they hopefully not once, if they continue to break trust, I will remove them from the organization, and that's a good thing for both, because if the trust is gone of that individual to be able to execute their job at a local level, then they're not having a good time because we don't trust them. So we're either going to start micromanaging them or we're going to start giving them useless stuff to do. And I'm not having a good time because I can't trust what output they produce. And so like now I actually feel like I have a liability on my team. Okay, so in the military, you aren't hired, you join up, you sign a contract for some number of years. A significant portion of the military is very young and not like, college educated. These are people with high school, GEDs or high school diplomas. That's it. They're 18, they're 19, they're 20 years old. They do not have a mature outlook on life. They do not have a very mature outlook on life. They have just graduated high school. A lot of times they're joining the military because maybe they don't have many other options or they don't see many options. They don't have a ton of, and this is it's too much of a broad brush, but just recognize that some percentage of people in the military, they didn't really know what else to do. Some of them did. Some of them were highly motivated to go become, soldiers. Some of them were just like, I don't know, if I don't join up, like what, I guess I go to do crime or something, like I become homeless. I don't know. So I'll just join the military. And so you have these people whose primary interests are, just say hedonistic.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And you don't trust them as a result of that. Because if we're doing something and it doesn't go particularly well, like if the company's trying to, I don't know, we're trying to figure out how many of a particular type of distributed, like a bed rolls we've given out into the unit. We're trying to find all our bed rolls. Everybody report how many bed rolls. The way I describe it is like Private Snuffy doesn't really care if the company figures out how many bed rolls we have. That's not interesting to them. Now, why do they do it? Because the sergeant walks into the room and says, how many bed rolls do you have? And if you don't tell me, and if you don't find out, and if I don't see you putting effort into this, you're going to have a really bad time. I'm going to give you duties you don't like. I'm going to make your life harder and more miserable for a while because you did not help the company get what the information it needed. And so it is a compliance-based structure. And it's a discipline-oriented structure where obedience is expected, because even though I might not fully trust this individual to be like a self-starter who's going to try to figure out the best thing for everybody, nope, they're a hedonist just trying to, do their thing for their benefit, chase girls, drink beer, like play video games. Like these are not the highest things we could be doing in life, the highest goals, but that's what they're interested in. I need to be able to hand that person a weapon in a combat zone and be confident that they're going to shoot at the right people, and not mess up. And so I have a disciplined, ordered, authoritative frame around that. Now, some people struggle with the military because of this, because they are actually self-starters who are interested in the good of the group and all these different things. And one of two things happens. Either they will push themselves out of the military at the end of their contract because they're just like, this doesn't work for me, it's not a culture fit, or they will tend to advance fairly rapidly. And the military is fine with both those outcomes. But they have to create a system that handles a low trust environment. Again, it's not to say they don't trust, it's just there's a different type of trust.
Correct. Yeah.
So when you're working with your graphic designers in the example you gave, if you don't trust them and they tell you, oh, that's not half an hour of work, that's going to be a long time, you're going like, I don't know if that's true. And you might go do research to validate whatever they just told you. Or you might tell them, do it anyway, and I want to see how you're going to do it. And if I think you're not doing it well, then I'm going to try to show you. I'm going to start micromanaging and directing you because I can't trust you to do it right. Versus if you trust them, you go, oh, okay, let me kick that back and make sure that it's okay that we spend that extra time or not, or whatever we want to do. And so trust relates to how much agency you push down, how much decision-making you push down. And this is, by the way, one of the reasons that in militaries, you do see in the modern militaries, for the most part, both junior officers and non-commissioned officers, because most militaries now have that type of setup. Most modern Western militaries, but a lot of militaries around the world have that setup. They actually get quite a bit of training in being autonomous, in making decisions in a battlefield environment. And again, it's depending on how much they're likely to lead. Sergeant won't know how to run a company per se, but they will know how to maneuver their particular unit if they were cut off from command. And the militaries that do that well have vastly outperformed the militaries that rely on centralized leadership.
Yeah.
Like only the officer can tell us what to do or something like that.
Yeah, but there's that drilling process, right? Every single day drilling process that it becomes second nature for the soldiers to actually follow the instructions, so that when they're cut off, even if your upper management command uh,
Yeah.
expects them to go to that rendezvous point, because they know that that's you watch this in series and movies where there people get cut off all the time, companies get cut off or whatever, and then they look at the map, they look at the situation. Okay, based on their training, based on what is the best outcome, the people that are cut off, they know what command is thinking and where they're going to send help, and that's where they have to go, and that's where it's expected. So yeah, and the consequences of not following instruction, pushing back, you can't have a military that operates on democracy, right?
Right.
Are we going left or right? Let's have a meeting. What do you guys feel, and let's do that. While on game development is a little bit different, because in a lot of times, depending on what stage you are in development, you have that luxury to actually sit down and sort of let's talk. And I've found funny is that as you were describing the low trust, and the people that actually tend to go to the military a lot, um, that sounded like a lot of Bible schools as well, where you when you go to Bible school, normally the story is, oh, I didn't make it in this college, or I don't know where I'm going to go, or I came here for rehab. So I had classmates that they were sent that because they were problematic childs. Obviously they became very good pastors afterwards, but the dropout rate as
God
well.
uses the weak, right?
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
right.
and God uses people who are good examples themselves, right? A lot of times,
Yes.
the heroes of faith in Hebrews, not a single one of them was a perfect example, right? You
Right.
had killers, prostitutes, and liars. So there's a lot of that going on, which is a good pivot for us to try to see if we could connect, and so that my audience can make sense as to what are we talking about and how does that apply to the Christian world. Because just that example with the military, not even going directly to game development, it's a good contrast, that, and not a contrast, but sort of parallels, where you see the same type of people that are going into very important positions, because these are people that are it'd be thankful if they're just holding guns, but now you have people that are drones, right? They have drones. They have the ability to kill a lot of people, and those are people important. But not all the time you will have the most moral or the most capable people applying for those jobs, because they're
Correct.
so easy to come in.
Well, and I wanted to just expand on this a second before we
Yeah.
shift into, because I think it will be relevant. When I think about the organization I design and the way leadership and culture functions, this is where, like, one of the things I come back to is trade-offs. Everything is trade-offs. There are pros and cons to every system. And the military has picked, whether organically or deliberately, and it probably started somewhat deliberately and then organically evolved over time, they picked a system where we want to make sure that the lowest common denominator isn't dangerous and might be useful. And what that means is that for people that aren't the lowest common denominator, as I said, some of them become very frustrated. You don't need to yell at me all the time. You don't need to manage my life like this. I wish I had a little bit more freedom. I would still be a good soldier for you. But the military says, no, the system we've built is one that optimizes for the lowest common denominator. Interesting thing that happens as you go up through, let's say, tiers of effectiveness per number of people.
Mhm.
So you kind of go from the general broad army into more like
Specialize.
scouts, rangers, um, special forces, these sorts of things. Um, you end up with a lot more autonomy being given, a lot less micromanagement of lives because there is now trust.
Mhm.
By the time you make it to special forces, the army trusts you to take care of your fitness. They
Mhm.
don't need to manage that. It's not to say you'll never be in a PT formation ever again in your life, but broadly, like you're taking care of that on your own. And
Mhm.
we know that. We know you're going to keep yourself in physical condition to do what you need to do. You're going to desire training and desire to make yourself better and desire to make the best decisions, desire to support your unit. Um, and the way leadership functions, the way those units are organized, even though it appears from the outside to often have similar structure, is very different. When you're making an organization of any kind, something to think about: who are you optimizing for? Are you
Mhm.
optimizing for the lowest common denominator, or are you optimizing for the highly engaged self-starter or the person with a lot of ambition or something like that? And if you build the system for the person with a lot of ambition, the lowest common denominator person who shows up they're going to make a mess.
Mhm.
Um, and so one of the ways the special forces solves that is they just don't allow those people to ever get into special forces, or do their best to keep them out, I guess I should say. The same thing when I was at Riot. We didn't want the lowest common denominator because we didn't want to have to create a system that managed the lowest common denominator. And so we had our pros and cons of the
Mhm.
system. Meant we had a much narrower group of people that could fill the role, but those people, once they arrived, were much easier to trust. Okay, so with that said, I'll let you continue the segue.
Because we'll come back to that very soon. So the title of the podcast is a sermon for one because based on my experience, the most effective sermons that I gave were the ones that were based on the story or passage or a verse that God sort of had it in my heart, and I had to preach to myself first for the audience of one. So a sermon for one.
Mm,
Is there something right now going on in your life, in your game development, or perhaps something that reliving from your military days, um, or something totally unconnected? Is there verse,
mhm.
passage, or story that's really talking to you right now?
Yes. Okay, so I'm in my reading through of the Bible. I've done something I haven't done before, which is reading through it chronologically. So I got a chronological Bible and I'm going through it, and it ended up that I'm going through it fairly more rapidly than I have in the past. So I'm reading like larger chunks at a time. And one of the things that has struck me on this most recent read through is that it's almost an inversion of the stereotype of the delta between the Gospels and the Epistles. Um, so the Old Testament is always very interesting and like just an amazing source of wisdom. As I got into the Gospels, the stereotype of the Gospels is like, well, Jesus, and he's all about love and grace and all these different things. And I'm going through it, and all I'm encountering in what Jesus is saying is like, oh my goodness, he was challenging people so hard against
Mhm.
everything that they thought was important. He is challenging them. He's challenging those who thought themselves righteous. He's challenging sinners. He's challenging those who think, if I just give a little bit to God, that's good enough. He's challenging everyone to say, no, what I'm calling you to is you have to give everything.
Mhm.
And you have to do it every day, and you have to not look back. And if you do, I promise you persecution in this life.
It wasn't even something good.
Um, right. Now that's an oversimplification and a
Yeah,
negative
yeah.
one. Obviously, there's also, anyone who loses
Mhm.
wives, houses, blah, blah, anything will receive much more and persecutions in this life and the next,
Mhm.
right? And
Mhm.
again, the persecutions are in the next life. The persecutions are stay in this one. But when I was reading through the Gospels, the thing that was just jumping out at me was like, I almost felt like, oh man, am I like failing? Am I not a Christian? Like what in the, because it was just challenge, challenge, challenge. Like, are you giving it all? And what's the reason I think this flipped what I felt like was a stereotype that was even present in my mind, having read through the Bible some number of times, was that normally like, oh yeah, the gospel is like happy, Jesus, love, grace, and all these different things. And I just wonder, like, how did that become? Because when you actually read what he wrote, he says, yes, there's some of that, but a lot of what he says is directed at a dramatic change in your life,
Mhm.
and no, there's no gray often.
Mhm. Mhm.
This is the way it is. There's a narrow door. There's the narrow path. Like, many go the way of the broad path. Like, I need you to go for the narrow path. A rich person, harder for a rich person to get into heaven than a camel to pass through the eye of the needle. Do we take this stuff seriously? And then, he does say, what is impossible for man is possible for God. And it's almost this idea. And I think that's to maybe for all of us to go, so many of us are relatively rich compared to somebody. And we probably all in many ways qualify as rich compared to the people he was talking to. Um, and so, like, hey, God's going to need to do a miracle because it's as difficult for the camel to pass through the eye of a needle as it is for you to get to heaven. It's harder. And so anyway, so I'm reading through the Gospels. This is my experience. And then I go into the Epistles and I felt like they offered me grace, which again, it's so funny because when people read these, I think often it's Jesus is the one that's stereotyped as the love and the grace and blah, blah. And again, I'm not saying he's not. That is an important part of his ministry for sure. But then you get to Paul and it's harsh and Peter's harsh and James is harsh. And actually I found them almost like they gave, as I was reading through them after reading through the Gospels and the challenge of Christ to live a life fully to God, Paul shows up and he starts saying, hey, we fail. It's okay. There's grace. It is by faith we are saved, not by works. And, James, even as he says it, is by works as well, but it's the works are a manifestation of the faith. They do not disagree, even though it seemed like if simple reading make it seem like they do. Even there, he's like, you're not going to succeed. It is, we've tamed all the creatures of the earth, but we've never tamed the tongue. And he who could tame the tongue can, I can't remember the exact quote, but something like, he who could tame the tongue could tame anything. Is that, I think it's he who could tame the tongue is a perfect man without flaw or something like that. My paraphrase of the scripture, excuse me. But there's this, so this was the thing that jumped was like, you're not going to do this perfectly. And God does have grace for you. Even though Christ came and preached this radically different God-centered world, you're not perfect. There is grace. That doesn't mean you shouldn't aspire to be what Christ called you to be. And so it was this time going through, it's just been backwards. It's just, I've been like, cause I just finished, Romans and it's just like, it's just backwards, it was like, wow, Christ was the one who brought the hammer down. And then the apostles were the ones who sort of said, hey, aim for that high bar and recognize you're not going to make it, and then fall at Christ's feet and ask for forgiveness. But continually be turning yourself into the person that more and more seeks to be who Christ called you to be. That was the thing. And again, like coming out of the Gospels, it was weird. I think that's the first time it's ever happened. I came out of the Gospels and I almost felt depressed.
Mhm.
I was just like, oh man, I'm like failing at this. I'm not doing it like every day. What do I do? Where's my time going? How is it everything for that? And then the
Yeah.
apostle sort of offered me a little bit of hope and grace.
The beauty about that is that in the time of Christ, they were still very enthralled with the law, right?
Mhm.
And the law was really not a way for salvation, but what it was the school teacher. And we think school teachers nowadays, you have to be very careful with the kids. Oh no, during that time, school teachers meant that is the one that actually disciplines you, right?
Mhm.
And that was the beating. And then Christ was there to show them, you guys are, if you want to to become followers of him, there's this drastic change that needs to happen, because you have to get a beating so that you can then see me. And I think when it comes to the Apostle Paul and the epistles, is that okay, the beating is done, the law is over. Now you have to look into grace. But the Apostle Paul still inserts a couple of things,
Yes.
because he's not the kindest either, because but not on the
Right.
harsher part. He did say also, um it is better for you not to marry, so that you can
Hmm.
focus your time and your energy into the
Hmm.
ministry and to Christ. And when I was trying to get married, that sounded really, really harsh, you know, really. So we're gonna basically become eunuchs now, just to
Yeah.
focus. But that was what he said, and that's what he did. He was unmarried because he wanted to be able to be accountable for every person that's put in front of him, and um, and it's a hard life. Galatians, when the apostle says that the life that I live in me right now is no longer mine,
Hmm.
but it's Christ. I used to make sermons out of that, and it's sort of super easy to do. And then when circumstances changes in our lives, and then we read back a verse, it talks to you different. I think the same similar way
Yeah.
that you're reading the Bible
Yeah.
in a different way, and it's
Yep.
sort of speaking to you in a different tone.
Yes.
And but that's also the fault with current media as well, because people who don't read the Bible want to characterize and stereotype Christ
Yes.
in a certain light.
Well,
And
it's the thing I'd say. So one, the interesting thing is the law was perfect,
yeah.
but
Hmm.
humans could not fulfill it. And the thing that Christ came and he fulfilled the law, so he did it all perfectly.
Hmm.
Uh, and he also demonstrated that the law was not the surface layer
Hmm.
that everybody thought it was. They thought it was about action. I remember watching a prominent man who is also Jewish in dialogue with other faiths.
Hmm.
And one of the things he was talking about was pornography. And he was like, well, we don't believe, and he was talking about Jews. I don't think this is actually broad, but he was a Jew who was like, yeah, we don't see pornography as wrong because you're not actually acting,
Hmm.
you're not committing adultery. And he's kind of said like, it was the Christians, it was Christ who brought up this idea that like the state of the heart matters. With some Jews, they just view it as like, no, it's just about what you do.
Hmm.
And so if you don't actually, now for me, I'm like, I mean, you're still doing something,
Yep.
right? But pushing that aside, what Christ did was he deepened, and he said,
Hmm.
like, if you look at a woman with lust in your heart, you have already committed adultery.
The intent of the
And
law was what.
exactly,
Yeah.
and so the law was over the top, um, but it actually had an impact that goes all the way down to the core of who you are, and so that even your thoughts, even if you never express them, can still be sinful, even if you never manifest them. They are
Hmm.
still worth for the Christian going like, ooh, why do I think that? Why am I feeling that? Let me think about what's leading me to that bad place, even if I'm never acting it out.
Hmm.
And I need to resolve that at that heart level. Um, so yeah, anyway, that was just something like the law remains perfect. Christ fulfills it, but the interpretation at the time was very problematic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And
and
that's what led to the rise of the Pharisees, right?
yes,
So self-righteous, and not doing something, wouldn't
right.
even help a Samaritan. It wouldn't even help somebody that was, the sort of Samaritan would not help, because that would mean that they would have done something that was against the letter of the law. And it's funny because later on, the Bible also says that it's not only seeing what you do, it's not only seeing what you thought about doing, but if you omit something that you know you're supposed to do,
Yes.
and
Right.
it's like there's no way out now,
Yes.
and you mentioned James earlier as well, and James also says, you follow nine of the Ten Commandments, but paraphrasing it, you follow nine of the Ten Commandments, but you fail one, you
You fail
failed
them all.
all of them.
Yeah,
So it's like, dude, you have no way out aside
exactly.
from getting grace. And grace is sort
Yeah,
of,
there's
yeah.
no, this gets into this. One of the things when I look back and I look at all, and this is like all of time is a lesson that God has given to us through Scripture.
Yep.
Um, and when I look at like what was the thing about this Israel thing, right? Why did He pick this people and raise them up as a nation?
Hmm.
Some of it's because He's God and He
Hmm.
chose Abraham or Abram into Abraham and all these different things. But I think also there's this thing of like, hey, if anyone wanted to claim that if only someone was set up perfectly to succeed, then they could be perfect. Then they would be sinless before God. But the problem is, it's just never just right. I think Israel is this example, starting as a theocracy, God present, God providing them their manna every day, and bringing water from the rock for them, bringing them quail in the desert, like all these things. God's doing this on their behalf. Every day they saw it. They saw the pillar of fire and the pillar of fire and the pillar of smoke, right? The cloud of smoke. Every day they were in the presence of God and the manifestations of God's miracles for them.
It wasn't even multiple generations. It's the same group of people.
Same group of people.
Yeah.
And we look back, and this is one of the other things that has been a long theme for me around breaking open the scripture. When you're growing up, you hear like, and the Israelites, and they were bad, and like the Pharisees, and they were bad. And as I kept going, the story of Nathan and David comes to mind for me, where David has slept with Bathsheba. She has conceived a child. The child has been born. Nathan shows up and says, your child's going to die. He tells him a story. In that story, the way he gets David caught and basically convicting himself.
Yeah.
He tells the story of the man who had like the lamb, and it was his only lamb, and he treated it like basically a member of his family. And there was a rich man who had many flocks. And when a guest showed up, he basically like steals this guy's lamb, kills it. And David's response was, that man must die. And then he says some other things about how he should be punished. And Nathan says, you are the man. And David is struck to the core. And he acknowledges his wrong, but the story helped him see it.
Yeah.
I think when we read the Bible, these are a bunch of stories. And what we can do as we read them is to say, I am the man. So when you see the Israelites within one generation failing over and over and over and over, don't look at them and say, oh gosh, those foolish Israelites, those stubborn, hard-headed Israelites. Say, that's me. This is the example that I have for me of how I mess up. And I think some people, like, we get time mixed up because we just read it. But it's just so easy to imagine somebody getting used to the grace of God, the miracles of God being all around us, that we just take them for granted. Because to some extent, isn't all of life and the creation of the world and everything yourself, isn't it all a miracle? We've managed to rationalize it as part of the natural world, but the natural world is just this collection of miracles that God keeps running. I always think about, there's this idea that like, if God, and this doesn't even make sense, but if God stopped focusing on the universe that we exist within, it would all vanish. And if you started thinking about it again, it would all come back. Because that's who God is. That's the power of God. That's the omniscience, the omnipresence, the omnipotence of God. And yet we live amidst all the miracles. And I think it's always interesting, you've recently had a kid. I've got one, hopefully, like Lord willing, coming out in a few weeks. And like when you encounter that as a Christian, like you can't help but notice the miraculous in this.
Yep.
This human being comes out, but it's easy to just take it all for granted if you don't believe in God. Oh, it's just part of the natural world. That's just how things go. Yep. Well, I don't know. Yep. New being, new like personality traits like show up within weeks. It sometimes feels like of the kid being born. I've got two that are older, and it's like, man, they're still kind of like they were when they were like 3 months old. And all of this is miraculous. And yet we take it for granted, just like the Israelites did. And so as you're reading the Bible, that's always the thing of like you don't like the Pharisees? You are the man. You are the Pharisee in some way. How are you the Pharisee? Like that should be the question we're always asking. And the problem is when you ask that question, it's like, oh my gosh, I am those Israelites who, really liked God when he saved me from the Egyptians, really obviously, when we walked through the sea and the Red Sea collapses on the Egyptians who are chasing us, and we all, Miriam starts singing and everybody's like, yay, we're praising and all this different stuff. And then 4 days later, it feels like we're already angry. But how many times has God done something amazing for you? And then 4 days later, you're grumpy about something stupid.
Yeah.
And it's again, so whenever I read through, I'm always like, you are the man. You who don't associate with the hero of the story. Recognize that you are not that. Anyway, that's a long tangent on you are the man. But to come back to that idea, like I think Israel was this nation, and it was it was perfectly set up to be the perfect nation.
Mm-hmm.
God was its leader through his prophets and judges initially. And they had the rules and laws from God directly. They had God in their presence, and they still couldn't get it right.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that should be an example of us, not of like, well, look how, bad the Israelites were. It should be this thing of like, humans can't do it.
Yep. Correct.
We can't get there on our own.
Mm-hmm.
And Israel is just this picture writ large across time in scripture and in reality, because those match, of a nation that had everything going for them and still got it wrong.
There's a school of theology, dispensationalism, and that's one that we espouse to, and we sort of break it down into different periods of time where God dealt with certain people in a certain way, and had like different commands and different scenarios. So, and I always thought, why would God do that? Right? Why would God have like, on this specific time, this is how I'm going to deal with them, and then on a different time, do that? And eventually, I learned and sort of applied to myself is that at the end times, when the great white throne and all the unbelievers will be set there, none of them will be able to say, well, if I lived during a time where God walked with man, we had no sickness, we didn't have to work, didn't have any problems with food, I believe. And you have Adam and Eve as an example.
Yep.
Right? Now, what if, what if there were no laws, and I'll just let our conscience, what we think is right? And you have the period between the fall, and then you have Cain and Abel, killing themselves. And then, okay, wait, so we can't do everyone have their own conscience. Maybe we should govern ourselves, right? And then you have Noah, where he says, you can, whoever kills by the sword dies by the sword. So it's self-governing. And what do? The Tower of Babel. They're self-governed, and you go, now how about if God made a covenant with me where he passed through the dead animals, right, and did not allow Abraham to pass?
Yes.
Right? Well, what if God made that step like for reconciliation? I think that we would do that. And what happened? Egypt happened to them, and then you come to Israel, right? Okay, no, wait. Now we need something. We can't rely on just talking with God, nothing structured. We can't rely on our minds because everybody has a different mind. We can't rely with ourselves. And obviously, even God coming, maybe God, write it down. And
write it down so we all know.
So we all know. He gives 10 commandments plus 660 plus for you to follow, and how to govern yourself, how to interact with other people. And we failed miserably.
Yes.
There's just that. And that's why.
Well, it's funny too, because we don't even fail on like, oh shoot, I boiled the kid in the mother's milk, right? Like we fail on the big ones. We're not on the edge like, oh no, like I interwove the wrong fabric here.
Yeah.
And again, I don't mean to minimize that, because those were important indications of the separateness of God. Like something like the fabric being not interwoven between two different fabrics.
Yeah.
But like you look at that and it's like, we didn't mess up on those. We messed up on like, you shall have no other gods before me.
Yeah, it's the first.
Not make.
It's the first one.
It was the first big one, right? Like these are the most critical. That's where we mess up, and I say we again, not the Israelites, because we are those. We are those
people. Yeah,
and I think that challenge, like you said, I think there's truth in what you're saying. That like, nope, I ran humans through a lot of different stuff, and guess what? You always fall over. You know which one didn't fall over? Christ. Why didn't Christ fall over? Because I was in Christ. Christ is my son. Christ is me. I and Christ are one. That is the only reason. And so in the absence of me being in you, no situation would be one in which you didn't fail.
Yeah.
And now we can step it back a second. We can go, well, why did you build the universe that way? And, Paul answers that with the like, who are you to question why God did this? It was for a reason that you may or may not be able to understand, but he is God and you are man. And I know that's many people hate that answer because we want to understand everything, but
it's
why
also,
should the potter say to the clay, or the clay say to the potter?
I think that's, and to go back to leadership as well, I think that is also a obviously God is omniscient, so He knows what's going to happen, right? But He does teach us that consequences exist, that there
Yeah.
are hard decisions that have to happen. There is judgment that is going to happen. The beauty about God is that in every single time that humanity failed, that went through that cycle of humanity failing, God has always shown grace. So you have going back, Garden of Eden. The first sacrifice, death, happened there to cover the sins of Adam and Eve. Right?
Hmm.
There was grace and mercy shown to Cain when he killed
Hmm.
Abel. You have the flood. Noah found grace in God's eyes, and then after that, what happened? He took a sinner from Ur, right, in Abram, and chose him and made a pact with him. And then you have Israel, where you read the Bible recently, so you know what Judges says. There's a repeating
Yeah.
theme there, and the
There was no
Israelites,
king, and everyone did what was
what was
right in
right
their
in
own
their
eyes.
own eyes, and it's like
Yep.
almost every chapter is like the same thing. And God, in His eternal patience, says, "Okay, come back. Let's do it again. Right? Let's do it
Right.
again. I'm going to show you mercy." They denied God during the time of Saul. It was a theocracy, and they asked, I want a king. We want a
Hmm.
king. Give us a human king,
Like the nations around us. We
like
want
the
a king
nations
like
around.
the nations around us.
And to choose, it wasn't the wisest. It wasn't the best. No, the tall guy. Let's have that
Yeah.
stereotype of let's get him.
Like a
So
human mechanism,
he
if
was
I've ever seen one. Yeah.
so they did that, and then after that, Christ started becoming more promised as the coming of the Messiah. The Messiah comes, they kill him, and as again, God shows mercy, and then shows the brings the comfort of the Holy Spirit. And in Stephen, it's like, just you basically just denied the Trinity. you know God's not going to send Gabriel and Michael here to sort of, okay, it's your turn, angel's turn right now. But God still showed mercy, and through calling of the Apostle Paul, because the Israelites had just said no, 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 no. God came, became their leader. They said no. God died for their sins. They said no. God gave them another example, give them miracles that they could see, promised for centuries. and
Yep.
and and God just keeps showing grace. And I think that's you know
And what's interesting too, to come back again to the counter arguments to this. So many say, but it's not enough grace. Only Noah was saved in the flood. Well, what about all the people that didn't believe? What about those that died in their unbelief in the desert? Those that fell in the desert, because none made it. That whole generation perished, except for Joshua and Caleb, right?
Caleb, yeah.
What about why wasn't there more mercy? And for me, I go like, there is something interesting around this. And it comes back. I do not find the moral argument for God's existence a very compelling one. If I'm an atheist, I think it's a non-starter.
Mhm.
Because it's very easy to rationalize away. That said, we have a moral instinct that we express constantly as human beings. And that moral instinct is for some type of fairness or justice in the world.
Mhm.
And when I look at God, He is the perfection of all of His attributes. And so if in the world He was constantly breaking the perfection of justice in order to achieve the perfection or an overabundance of mercy, He would not be God in the balance of all of the perfection of His attributes as displayed through His creation.
Mhm.
And so there is a necessity for some judgment to be present because it is the expression of who God is.
Mhm.
And I think we don't want that. We want God to coming back to that, even that thing I said about like the New Testament and the Gospels being mischaracterized. It's just all about love and grace, when in fact, Christ challenges a ton and talks a lot about the judgment of God and the difficulty and the how many won't make it. Many are called, few are chosen. Like, these are things that we should be grappling with. But you have this, and it's like, because God is not just love.
Mhm.
It is okay, like John, it's clearly okay to describe God as love because John
Mhm.
does. But he's also everything else to
Mhm.
its perfect maximum, and all coexisting perfectly. And I think it bothers people when especially non-Christians, because they see that and they're like, no, I just want the and it's like, yes, but you wouldn't actually want to live in that world.
Yeah. It's
Because it would be unfair.
yeah. There was somebody who I watched a sermon where the preacher said we sometimes question God's mercy, but we would definitely not want him to be just and fair all the time. Why?
Yes.
Because that means that Christ didn't have to come. Right?
Right.
Our sins, if he was going to be just and fair, goodbye. You commit a sin,
Yeah.
you're no longer
Yes.
be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. You're done. So, and these are people sometimes that don't really dive into the
Right.
Bible, don't read to it, because if you look at Noah, for example, was just Noah and his family? Noah was preaching for 120 years. 120 years. I'm already tired at 40 right now.
Right. Yeah.
Can you imagine if I'm at 40 and say, okay, I'm going to give you 80 more years, and you have to preach to people that, and they were mocking him and all of that. So opportunity was there, and that's a problem with accountability. This generation with accountability, I'm telling you, Ben, it's like amazing. One of my favorite things that I like to watch is like police videos on body cam videos on YouTube, because there are certain people that have zero accountability, and that's becoming an issue right now. And God is all about accountability, right? And God allows us to experience certain things so that we can learn what the consequences are. The same way that we're both parents of small kids, and there are times that you tell them, okay, no, don't go there, don't touch that, and we physically try to pull them out of danger.
Yes. Yep.
We physically try to do, and going back to the Israelites, God was doing that all the time, protecting them and helping them, feeding them, giving them manna, giving them water from stone in the middle of the desert. Like, he was providing to them, trying to keep them alive. But there are times where we look at our kid, you've told them already 5 times, probably spanked them, probably had a word with them, you've told 5, 10, 15 times. There is that one time where you go and say, okay, I'm going to watch her get hurt. But obviously not broken legs or anything. But I'm gonna let her fall down this time.
Yeah.
And I'm there. I'm gonna pick up the pieces, but she needs to understand what it means by don't do that because.
Yep.
Right. And
I have a couch downstairs, and both my girls like climbing all over it. And when they're really little, they don't know how to catch themselves, and so I say like, don't go up on the top. But they kept going up on the top. And at some point, I did exactly what you said, which I was like, okay, let's make sure there's nothing dangerous behind the couch. And I think I told my wife this. I was like, she's like, what? They're up on the top. I'm like,
we're like the Godzilla meme.
They aren't listening.
Let them fight.
They aren't listening. I'm going to let them fall. It's not that big of a distance. Kids are pretty tough. I can also still respond if I think that they're going to be falling at like they're going to land right on their head or something like that. Could be really bad. But they aren't listening. And they're very small, and they, especially before they're speaking and can understand words and things like that. So it's just very difficult. But yeah, exactly what you said. It's like, okay, go ahead. All right. Now we learned, right? We get a little bit of crying and stuff like that. And it's like, oh, we're a little bit more cautious at the top of the couch now.
Yeah.
And you're right. I think, yeah, accountability and that idea of actions have consequences, and we need to accept the consequences. I think that's one of the things that I see nowadays is people would probably acknowledge there are consequences, but they don't want to accept them. They're like, no, these aren't the right consequences. I should have gotten different consequences. I want a different consequence. And it's like, no, you get the consequences you get. And what you still need to do in the midst of that is take accountability for your action.
Yeah. A little bit like the military stuff, right? Where there's a phase of your training or phase of whatever you're doing that the military allows you to fail during training boot camp or whatever, where you'd have like people almost drowning or things like, because you have to experience a certain level of what the consequences might look like, Like, I don't know if you're still allowed to shoot with rubber bullets or things so that you can feel how it feels.
Didn't happen to me, but well, I've done paintball in my life, but yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
No, but I get what you're saying.
Mhm.
There's these things, where you're all going to have some really bad days where things don't go well for you.
Mhm. Mhm.
And you have to deal with that,
Yeah,
and you have
correct.
to learn that it's okay.
But when you were when you shifted to game development, um,
Mhm,
you have to change the leadership mindset that you have, right? Because
mhm,
you're no longer in command and control. You're sort of it's an influence driven environment, right? And I believe
yeah,
you mentioned in some of your videos where you speak about influence without authority, right?
mhm,
And and this is where I want us to sort of talk a little bit about uh, a lot of the people that watch this podcast are pastors, and one of the most difficult things to do as pastors is how do you influence people to do something, to be part of the ministry or to accomplish something for the body of Christ? How do you do that when most of them are volunteers and don't have to be there, right?
mhm.
So I know you talked a little bit about trust earlier. So you talk about the influence trifecta: trust, helpfulness, and social fabric. Could
Mhm.
you could you share some of that insight? Because I get a lot of people who pastors who they just do it all because they can't influence or they can't get people to participate. So you'll have the
Yeah,
pastor that preaches, the pastor that does visitation, the pastor that plays the guitar, the pastor that sings. He has to do all of it because, and I think that's sort of a um, something that I think that one of the things that if could you change the words game development with church and instead of producer
what
pastors?
shifts it's funny actually, the experience that comes to mind for me is more, when I was doing World of Warcraft as a raid leader,
Mhm.
because I have this group of people here. They're not like, I don't pay them.
Mhm.
They don't have to be here, and yet some number of times a week, we all hop into a raid together and try to kill a boss or a series of bosses in dungeons in the
Mhm.
context of the video game. Why do they follow me? Why do they listen to me when I say, okay, you're going to do this and you're going to do this and you're going to do this? And there is a lot of direction that goes on, right? Yeah, okay, you're going to heal these people. Like, and there are even sub leaders depending on the sophistication of your raiding group. Of like the healers are going to sort of self organize a little bit, and then I'm going to tank, and this person's going to tank that, and here's how we're going to. And everybody make sure you avoid. And when you hear me start shouting this, everybody
Mhm.
run to the left or run to the like. Why do they listen? The reason they listen, we have to collaborate to achieve a shared goal. Now, some of it's because it's fun. We
Mhm.
enjoy it. Um, but in all of this, the thing I come back to is like, there's a meaning that they're seeking here. And so they're willing to follow me because I help them reach where they're trying to go. And what's interesting about this applied to church is not a perfect analogy. Because actually, while that should be true, often one of the things that pastors should do is often advocate people to go somewhere where they don't want to go.
Mhm. Correct.
And so you can try to direct people. And when you direct people, you will tend to get compliance. If people have to listen to you for some reason, which is rare in churches, but sometimes someone might
Mhm.
feel that, oh, I have an obligation to listen and do what my pastor says I should do. I think that's actually a good instinct. So if they tell me to do something, I will do it, but I'm only doing it because they're telling me. You get someone who complies, but you aren't going to get someone who is excited to go do that thing or is like,
Mhm.
this is an important thing that we are going to do. And when I've had the most effective teams, they were never compliance based. They were never teams where you could just tell everybody, like the leaders just told everybody what to do. They were always, there's something we are trying to accomplish together that is meaningful to us. So, in the context of church, one of the questions is like, well, what's meaningful in the context of church to the people within the church? And part of me says that, like, if a pastor, and especially early on, kind of does everything, like you said, they preach and they're leading the
Mhm.
Bible study and they're doing that. I know that's exhausting because I've seen those pastors as well. They're in the U.S. and U.S. churches as well. They do everything, right? They have to take point on everything. Um, Sometimes that is where you start because nobody else knows how to do anything yet.
Mhm.
and you have to train them a little bit so that they understand where they're trying to go. What too often happens is you get caught in that as the norm, and you teach your congregation. You basically establish a culture where the pastor does everything. And I've seen this happen with producers in game development, where the producer thought they were being helpful by asking everybody, well, what can I do to help you? And they didn't think that hard about what they were being asked to do. And so whenever anybody said anything, they just started doing it. And I call this a production trap. It's the production trap of being basically the glorified intern of the team.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Teams love having a glorified intern, just like churches love having a pastor that does everything, because it means they don't have to. But we were talking about this right before we started the stream. What does it mean to say no? I'm not going to do this anymore. Why not? Because it's something you should be doing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think many times we fear, because they are volunteers, what if they all leave? And I think, in contrast to me in a raid, in World of Warcraft, or me in the military, or me in game dev, the interesting thing is, if we asked them to do something that was in line with where we felt God was calling them to go and the church to go,
Mm-hmm.
if they all leave, can we say, as leaders of the church, that's okay? Are we comfortable saying, like, it was important for us because we'd actually created an unhealthy culture where we were not they were not an active body. They were a passive body.
Mm-hmm.
And we need active bodies. And so what does it mean to create that? So anyway, I've covered a couple different things here, but one is like, what's the meaning you connect them to? And you might have to teach them and train them and help them understand what the meaning they connect to. And I think one of the things too, this is so funny because it happens in game development and happens in churches. The goals end up becoming about the process or some simple thing we can measure. They become, like in game development, what am I trying to do? Well, I'm trying to create a compelling experience, an engaging experience for a player that they would choose to engage with over anything else they could be doing for some amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
But that's really, really hard to measure how that's going while I've got 50 or 200 or whatever people like trying to develop this game. And so what do I start measuring? Well, how many features did we get done? How many pieces of content did we build? What's our velocity? Did we hit all of our milestones? I start measuring these sub things that are not actually important, that are only there in service to the thing that matters, which is creating the engaging experience. Churches have their own versions of this. It could be growth, could be revenue, could be the new building we want to build. It could be hiring an associate pastor. It could be like whatever it is. We can pick smaller goals, having the best music, right? Like there's whatever it is, we can pick the wrong goals. And they're very appealing. But we have to remember that our overall goal is to the kingdom. And when we lose that and we start thinking, and the problem is often the small goals that we pick did at some point, or perhaps even still do, seem to line up with the big goal. If I'm making a game, I need 12, I know how many levels I want, right? I need 12 levels. Okay. Well, that means I finished the 4th level. We're doing great, everyone. Let's keep working. We got to make those. And so it's not wrong to know that you want 12 levels and you've made 4. Just like it's not wrong to know, because I need 12 in order to have that compelling experience. But the compelling experience is the point, not the levels. And if I could get the compelling experience with fewer, isn't that better, not worse? And so that's, again, the game dev. How many churches strive for growth? Or again, some other thing. It's almost cliche to talk about it, but then also to fall into the trap, right? To talk about we don't want to be that church that just strives for growth, for growth's sake and all this different thing. It's like, okay, cool. Well, what if you shrunk a bunch? Well, that would not be, everybody would be really upset then. Why? What if you shrank because God called you to something and a bunch of people left? You should be okay with that. But if metric of success in your head is growth, and so for me, it's where is God calling you? Where is God calling your church? And this is something that I think is for the leaders of that church, not just the pastor, but the pastors, the elders. They need to be engaging with that broad question. And if that means that God says, hey, this is that thing. I always appreciate pastors who are in they're in great positions and everything's going great. And then they're just God's calling me somewhere else.
And they
go and do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, everything's going really well and you're doing great. And your family loves the area you're in and all these things. I'm calling you to go to Alaska. And the thing again, to see the pastor go okay. I'm going to Alaska. I think as church leaders, we need to be thinking about that. What are we called to? Now, we get some things for free as goals from the Bible. We should be, heart, soul, mind, and strength, loving God. We should be spreading the gospel, the Great Commission. We have our 10 Commandments, these things, like we want to be doers of the word, not hearers only. Great. Okay. Like we can read through the Bible and we can find commands, and these commands are valuable, but as a church, you have some purpose for being there. And what's also cool is God, I wouldn't, I'm going to say it, even though it's a slight extrapolation of what is in Scripture, and you have all the people you need to do whatever your church is called to do,
Correct.
even if most of the people in your church leave. This, I think, when you read through and Paul is talking about the different parts of the body, and can the eye, say to the foot or whatever, right? Like, I don't need you or anything. God is going to give you the pieces you need to do what you need to do. The question is, are the people in your church being asked or stepping up to fill the roles that you have? So if you're a pastor and you're caught in that trap of like, I'm doing everything and I don't know how to get anybody else to do anything, one thing you can do is ask. Sometimes the pastor just doesn't ask because, again, they've gotten used to it. This is normal. I have fallen into the pattern of I do everything. And so could I ask? I've done this, by the way, in dev teams where like I've realized there's other things that are that I need to be focusing on, and there's this thing that the team needs to do, and I was the one who like maybe started it, and I've been running it for a long time, and then I go like, hey, I need someone else to start running this. Who can do that? And someone often steps up. But first is like, are you willing to ask your congregation to step up? And if they don't, are you willing to challenge them to step up?
There's a huge problem with business without impact, right? And that's sort of what you're talking about right now. Yeah. One of the biggest challenges that I've seen in churches as well, in small churches especially, where the pastor thinks that the roles that are going to make the church successful are like 1, 2, or 3 only. Like it's somebody that preaches, somebody that leads, and somebody that sings. Sort of that's the rule. And I've come through pastoring several churches. I've come to understand that um, that's not the breadth of what the roles in the church are, because you have people, and I love to use this story. You have people that are excellent ushers, and there are people who come back to churches because they met this usher who sat down with them and talked to them, or somebody that's very good at smiling, that just looks at you, and then from across the room they give you that smile with missing teeth, and and it's like oh, I want to come back for that smile. We have one of the churches that I used to be a pastor of. We had this young man who loved to sing, absolutely loved to sing. He wanted to be a song leader, etc. But he was the definition of tone deaf. He could not hold a note. But I saw in him the heart of somebody that loves to worship God and to sing. In most churches, he'd be put in a soundproof room because he'd be disrupting our service. But we decided, let's try to see how well can we train him to sing. Like, how close can we get him to the note? And he never got to the note, but we taught him a trick to when he can start lip syncing. So if you can't reach it, just lip sync, and then the backup vocals will help. And we have him lead worship, and our church was blooming. It's booming. It was booming and blooming as well, because we had local people who heard the out of tune voice singing outside. They came because they wanted to see what's going on, and they saw somebody that was worshiping God with all his soul, all his might, and all his heart. And and I think that that's one of the big problems with pastoring nowadays, is that we want to fall into gimmicks. Oh, that church does a very good closing their eyes while they worship, so we should find somebody that closes their eyes very well and worships. We have to have a pastor who shouts, and because that's sort of what wakes people up. But that's not necessarily what makes the church, because you have And I think it's wonderful that the Apostle Paul uses the body of Christ instead of the organization of Christ, or talks about like
Mhm.
the government of Christ. Why? Because the body, when it misses certain limbs or certain senses, it compensates and adapts a lot
Mm.
times,
Mhm.
right? You see
Yeah.
that my uncle had polio, so he had to move with his hands a lot, and they didn't have like wheelchair in the past, so he had crutches. He had an
Mm.
absolutely massive torso, right? So he had big hands because it compensated because he had to exercise something more. I think that churches, the pastors, and I don't know if you have any insights in how to identify. Number one, how to identify when we are busy but not having impact, and we're just caught in that routine, because sometimes routine becomes the
Yes.
worship,
Right.
right? That's just
Right.
the routine. We come here, we do this, we do that, we give, and then we go home, come back, and then we're worshiping God, and we lose sight of what really you, in your own words, what the North Star is, what's the goal of the.
Yeah.
So how do you identify when you're stuck, and do you have any insights when, as a producer, that a pastor could see in his congregation as to how best use the chess pieces that he has, because not everybody
Mhm.
can move on an L, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So,
This is a tough one in the context of a church, actually, because you usually have some measure when you're in game development or corporate America of there's a mission and there's a goal and there's a thing I'm
mhm,
trying to make, but there's often like, hey, look, if let's just say, like Eliyahu Goldratt wrote a book called The Goal, and I disagree partially with his outcome, but one of the things I think it wasn't totally wrong. His goal, his thing was like the goal is to make money.
mhm,
Church doesn't have the goal of making money. What do we have the goal of? Well, our my pastor says it is our goal is to make much of Jesus. Um, and so I think what it looks like to understand if you're holding to the vision or moving towards the vision or not in a church is going to look different because, again, you can look to the Bible and then you look to the Spirit as the leaders of that church and you go, where do we feel called to be, and are we willing to go there? Um, and if I don't feel any direction there, uh, I think some people might be very concerned. Then I'll leave that between them and God to some extent. Maybe that's correct. If they feel massive concern, then maybe this is like, oh, maybe I'm far from God right now. And maybe they should work on that. That might be how God's working in their lives. It may also be that God's just like, just do the things I told you to do, right? Like, look at the Bible. Is your church operating in a way that lines up with what I've called Christians to be in the Bible? And I think if we see the answer is like, no, okay, what's happening? Are they not attached to it? Why not? How do we reattach them to the focus on God's kingdom? Because this idea of North Star is very important, and Christians share that North Star of serving God. And and all the things that fall out from that, like um, evangelism, living moral lives, all these different things, but they're all manifestations of this idea of like we are trying to serve God, we are trying to honor God because He is God. And He is worthy of that. And so when I look at my church, are we doing that? And that to me, that feels like a local answer. But when it's not there, I would almost say that the pastor, like, can you tell when it's not there? Can you look at your church and say, I don't think we're doing our best to honor God. I don't feel like we're doing our best to move towards God. And to some extent, we should say, like, that's always going to be true because we're flawed, failed humans. But are there big things like have we fallen into, to your point, the routines, the patterns? Are we phoning this in week after week, or are we seeing? Because one of the things that is I don't want to over prioritize this because it can take you to some weird places. But if your church is like sort of an ongoing, never changing thing, and doesn't seem to be doing much good, it does not look like the church that is described in the New Testament. Um, and one of the things I might even look at is go read some books about the persecuted church. Tortured for Christ, God's Smuggler, The Heavenly Man. Like, go read about churches in other parts of the world, and get a grasp of like what's going on for them and what is exciting. Because one of the things that I think can happen is when people are checking the box of Christianity in their life, often that means that they are not seeing and experiencing the amazing things that God is doing all the time. And it might not be because he's not doing them. It's just because we're almost like numb to it. As I was talking about earlier, right? Like we get used to the manna in the desert showing up. And so I think as a church, I guess I want to say firstly, I don't feel like I have a great answer to your question, but there's this thing of like, I would almost ask the pastors to go like, what would it look like if your church was really excited about serving God and building his kingdom and not our own? And when you look out at your congregation, you look at what they say and what they do and how they act, do you see, because I can imagine one church where everybody is constantly involved in church activities. And it's great. And like, they're all super passionate and those church activities seem to be doing a lot of good, both internal to the church and external to the church. I can see another church where very few people are involved in church activities, but as the pastor who knows their congregations, the people who know each other, they also know that like so many people are doing so much good for God. And even though there's not as much direct engagement with the church activities, this is clearly a living body that is not passive. It is an active, living body seeking God. So I don't want to say like, well, when everybody's involved in the church, then you should be winning, and if people aren't, then that means that, yes, well, maybe they've got their own ministries and the church is actually a place for them to receive something important and to give something important. And then they go out and they do their ministry. But I would say that when you're thinking about your church, there should be some of both, because God's giving you the people you need to do what you're there to do. The question is, are you asking them? Are you challenging them to do that? And will you accept the fact? And I think this is really tricky. What if you went and asked somebody and that caused them to leave? What if you said, hey, I really feel like you should be involved in the children's ministry because you do. And they say, this is like the fourth time in the last 2 years you've asked me this. That's it. I'm done. I'm leaving. I don't want to do children's ministry.
It's
I think, yeah. You're a pastor. What do you think of that?
I used to operate in where I had positions that needed to be filled, and I have to look at my congregation and try to see if I can bend certain people to fit that specific square or triangle, because I needed somebody that does well with children ministry. So what I would do is, whoever has kids, you're good for children's ministry, or if you were a teacher as a profession, then you have to be a Sunday school teacher or something like that. And I was not successful with that.
Yes. By
So
the way, my wife is a teacher, and she's experienced this, and it's very frustrating.
yeah,
Because she was an English teacher for 6 years, and she said whenever she goes to churches, they always just assume.
yeah,
And she actually does not like. She does not feel like she's very proficient at it. She doesn't feel called to that. Like, there's other things that she would love to do in the context of a church, but like teaching isn't one of them. So anyway, it's
yeah.
interesting you bring that as an example. It's very personal for me with my wife, where she's always like, just because I was a teacher,
Can I not? Can I
I
not be
don't want to do it.
anonymous in my employment?
Exactly. Can I not be a teacher today, please?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of auditors and treasurers are people that just have money, and and they're asked to fill up positions, and that wasn't something that was working. So what I did is I tried to know people a little bit more, like talk to them. What are their likes and dislikes? What seems to be something that they are being called for, without them actually knowing that that's a role that they can fill in the church. So my advice only for pastors is, open your eyes, right? Open your eyes to the congregation, how they interact, have lunch with them, and see what seems to be the thing that they like to do, and create that position in the church. You know, if the position in the church, let's say for example, somebody, you go to their house and they have a beautiful garden, you know, why not ask them, do you want to decorate with flowers the church? Because we have like something that
Right.
have in our church. You have a green thumb, is that what you call? So you have a green
Yeah.
thumb, would you like to donate and do some of the flower arrangements? And that becomes something that they love doing, and doing what they love in the church. If you do what you love, you can never call that work, right?
Mhm.
And sometimes that's sort of what happens. And for me, that's how we did. Even if the position itself that they wanted to do so, they were not necessarily the best qualified for, but
Mhm.
because,
Like your singer.
yeah, like my singer, God is not checking if you're hitting the notes or not,
Right.
right? Can you imagine if he did? Because I am also tone deaf. I'm thankful for AI right now, but I can't hold a note. I posted a meme. Somebody took a candid photo of us, and I'm talking, watching the sky, and my wife has this big hat on her, and it's very sunny, and it looked like I was trying to sing, and I posted, "This is true love." I'm trying to sing, and my wife is supporting me publicly, but she's just wearing a hat so people don't recognize her. So, so for me, that's sort of my solution for it. The only problem is that there's a mindset that needs to change. That this is not the military where you need X number of people for infantry, X number of people for, here to be able to accomplish that, or
Yeah.
corporate where you need to have this position filled. You can actually go to the church and paint a wonderful masterpiece with just the colors that you have. There was this
Yes.
painting that there was this.
By the way, this is actually more like the military and more like game dev or anywhere else. It's that thing of the phrase of you go to war with the soldiers you have,
Mhm,
and then your job, if you're leading that, is to figure out how do I best help organize this group so that we do accomplish the mission. And I think again we have such a blessing in the context of church because we know God has given us the people we
mhm,
need.
mhm,
Like when I'm out there leading teams sometimes and I'm like, oh my goodness, I don't have a role I need. That might be true. In the church, if you're like, I don't have a role I need, it's like, then that's not that important.
mhm.
Or it's going to show up.
Yep.
And you just keep praying about it.
And
If you need something, God will provide it. And I think it's kind of a blessing, but it's also, a wait on God, be patient, and also see what you can do, to your point, with the colors you have. I love that analogy.
Mhm,
That's a great way to frame it, because some of the best teams I worked with were not optimized, but they were really good at working together to get stuff done. And so even though they didn't have just the right skills and all the right experience or whatever else, they crushed problems.
mhm.
Like and it was more, they were more than the sum of their parts.
The thing that I notice as well is that once you do that, you start to see what the specialty of your church is. Um, not
Mhm.
not all church are singing churches. We can't have like
Right.
a very good cello player like yourself, right? In it,
Okay.
yeah, you can't you
I'm
can't.
an amateur cello player, but thank you.
But you can't really have all churches to have like a symphony there, or all
Yes.
churches have a very masterful pastor or a Sunday school teacher or a beautiful building. Not that any of those are wrong, right?
Right.
But those are that specific church's specialty, right? And that specialty is born out of what's currently available there. And that
Yes.
brings me to one thing that you talked in one of your videos that I edited, was talking about shorter iterations, right? We
Mm,
tend to think in churches that the iteration is a super long one. It's like eternity long, right? And
mm,
that's sort of what we have to. That's the goal, that, and we keep forgetting the bad signs, like the QAs with red flags saying, "Hey, wait, there's something wrong and something there," and you're just plowing through it because you think that that's really the goal. And the goal for the church has to be like a multi-block church with like a band, and you have to have a pianist, and because that's sort
yeah.
of what they see, like a Hillsong church, and this
Sure.
is
Yeah.
what we want. When what if God called you to be a church of just 5 people? And there's just one member that you were supposed to really build up because he'd be somebody great in the future, right? What
Right.
if that was the calling of the church? And
Yeah.
I don't know if you agree with me, but
No, that totally, absolutely. And I actually currently attend a house church.
Mhm,
And there's some number of families in it, and there's advantages that the house church has. I talked earlier about pros and cons. Everything has pros and cons. Being in a house church, we meet in each other's homes, and I would say it's a much more intimate, much more close. I tend to know the people in this church better than I knew the people of my last church.
mhm,
Um, And that's really cool. Like, that's a real strength of the church. And I think that's been very helpful for a lot of people in the church. It's not a huge church because you can't fit that many people in a house. And we've said that, like, if we ever got too big, we haven't. Uh, if we ever got too big, maybe we'd split into two house churches, right? Um, it also means that you generally have more capital available because you don't have to maintain a building or pay a mortgage or rent anything. So you save some money there, and that means you have more to give away. Okay, these are advantages, right? And there are advantages across all these different churches. One of the things, to come back to your idea of like iteration length, regardless of that, there's this idea of like perfect is the enemy of good. And when I see anything where, okay, here's the big, giant, long, it's kind of hilarious, right? If I ask someone, some people have their 10-year plan for life. And I wouldn't say there's anything wrong with it as long as if you have a 10-year plan for life and you're someone out there listening, I'm like, okay, that's fine, right? Have your 10-year plan. Just recognize your 10-year plan is, what's the word? It it is only going to work so far as God allows it to work. Um, and there's a particular word for that. I'm forgetting it, but like this, God has your 10-year plan. In fact, God has your whole life plan. And so if your 10-year plan conflicts with his, just know you didn't lose anything. And I think churches can get into that space of like, here's the 5-year plan, here's the 10-year plan. Well, we expect there, we've looked at the demographic data and it seems like this area is going to grow. And that means we're going to need an additional, something or other, an additional pastor, additional building, or additional, like we need more parking space, whatever it is. Okay. James is really clear about this. Like, you don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. And so if you don't say tomorrow, I will go to this place and do this in this business, like say, Lord willing. And so as long as we hold all of our plans with Lord willing, but one of the things that happens when we do that, I think, is we realize that like so many times in our lives, when we've had 5 or 10-year plans, they haven't gone the way we expected.
mm,
And sometimes severely not.
mhm. I said
And yet God,
180.
yeah, exactly. And yet God is still there.
Mhm,
God is still taking care of you. And if you look back, you will also see God working in your life, and you will see him building you into the person that you perhaps needed to be for something that you would never have built yourself into. So when we acknowledge the ethereal nature
mhm,
of the 10-year plan, I think we can then go, well, wait a minute, what should I do today? And it's again, it's not wrong to have it. Just keep it vague, keep it big picture, keep it, or if you make it specific, hold it very lightly and make sure that the 10-year plan doesn't get in the way of you just doing something, even if it's imperfect now. I think especially the more advanced the church becomes, the more they want, like I have known people who were very competent worship leaders or participants in like a worship band environment who have been in churches where they were not considered qualified enough. You weren't good enough. Hey, the expectation for expertise and professionalism among our worship team is very high. And so you don't meet the bar. Sorry. I know you really like the fact that you play French horn and you'd love to do it with us, but you're not good enough. I'm not saying that's like wrong per se. Like maybe there's some appropriateness if someone, like, you had a very nice sounding worship team and someone who didn't know what they were doing was like, well, I play guitar. And then they just came in and started making a mess. Okay, that's not good, right? That's not good. That might be disruptive to the worship of all involved. So there's nuance to all of this, but it's just like, what does it mean for us to be okay with the imperfect? What does it mean for us to be like, to go forward, to try something? Because in what they've learned in software development and they're figuring out in game development is that we don't actually know what the final product's supposed to look like. we know it's supposed to engage players. We know it's supposed to do good things. We know it's supposed to bring in revenue. Like there's a bunch of things, like we think it's going to be in this space, but we don't really know a bunch of the details. And how do we get there? Well, we try things and we see what works. How much more in churches do we not know what God is going to do tomorrow and next year and et cetera? We have the view, we can have the vision, the North Star of the Bible. We can have the North Star of where we feel God's calling us to go. But we have to go into that and say, okay, God, I think this is where you're calling me, but maybe you're just calling me there so that this actually goes in a completely different direction. And I don't know that. And instead, I'm going to leave that to you. What I do know is that the things that you want to go well, you'll bless, and they'll work and they'll do what they want. And the things that don't. And so if I spend tons of time trying to make everything perfect, versus the fast iterations. And again, I'd be interested if someone like has tried this in the context of church. If like someone out there has tried, what about like a lot of little bets, like a little tries? I'll try this, I'll try that. Let's try this. Oh, I had someone who's interested in doing that, so I just spun it up, and then you just sort of looked at them and you said like, well, which ones are gaining traction? Maybe those are the ones that we should put more effort into. Maybe, oh, that one's going well. Let's try more. And because that's what you do in game development, or what you should be doing in game development. Don't make a master plan. Your master plan is wrong. It's wrong from the time you start it. Instead, have the rough understanding of what the big picture goal is, and then just start trying things and see if you can slowly build your way towards that goal. And in our case, God has control of the goal, and He will bless the things He wants to bless. So I have not. So I'm making. I just want to like be really clear. I'll caveat this. I'm making this all up on the spot based on the question you just asked. But that was what came to mind for me when you talked about shorter durations and how they might apply in the context of churches. Be wary. Like perfect is the enemy of good. Try stuff. Be willing to get to engage with people and see what works and what doesn't. And then the things that work, maybe that's God saying like, yeah, that one's good. Keep rolling with that one. I've had that happen in my life. That's for sure. God has not opened doors.
I had just sort of to close things up. I'm now more a business owner than a pastor right now, sort of, because most of my time is like editing, building better games videos and other stuff. but but
Good at it.
that's sort of
Appreciate
thank you. But that's sort of where God has led us. What we had started when we got married was to become missionaries and go to Africa, to go to somebody and be 100%, um, supported by the ministry, and that was sort of what we felt our calling was. And we kept banging our heads, me and my wife, we kept banging our heads on that, and we declined opportunities, and I said, because we're working towards that goal, that 10-year goal, 20-year goal. And later on we sort of realized that what was clearly God's will was our decision right now, because we knew exactly that this decision that we have right now, should we attend church or not? Is that a yes or no? Should we move forward here? That seemed like we knew exactly what God wanted us to do based on the Bible and etc. The 10-year plan is something so far and so complicated that we were making smaller decisions and actually going against what we felt was God's will, because we had to reach the goal out there. And we forgot that goal was not a goal that God set. It was a goal that I set because I thought that I was good at something and I was able to do this. I was properly trained to do this. But the thing that was louder, I'm also making this stuff right now, but the thing that felt louder, I'm just realizing that the when God's will was so loud was for the things, the immediate things that I had to make decisions for today, for tomorrow, not next month and etc. Obviously, you sort of have your path going there, but we've it's been weird because we've no longer made decisions based on something that's so far away, when God is clearly moving you a couple of degrees to the left or a couple of degrees to the right. And sometimes you think that's small, but once you put that into scale, that's a whole different solar system that a couple of degrees make.
There's two things that come to my mind there. Continuing this through, just kind of making things up as we go. One is there are no shortage of efforts that seem like big, grand efforts that organizations of all kinds, including churches, have put a lot of energy behind and resources and people and time and money. And they did all the things that they thought they needed to do. And then they got to the day when that thing would happen and it just fell flat.
Mhm.
And maybe nobody showed up and all this different stuff. And it's not always the case, but I always, in this, it's almost like, could you have done a smaller version of this? Or if a pastor finds out that like, oh, there's people in my congregation that are really interested in blah topic. Okay, well, I could go read 50 books and try to, find just all the perfect material and spend a bunch of time creating the absolute best Bible study on that topic that you've ever seen. And or I could like realize that maybe I should just read like 1 or 2 books and then go talk with those people and see if that's helpful
Mhm, mhm.
and see if they want to do more of that and see, and I can grow with them over time. Um, and I think that idea of like, what's the small step you take, right? Like, oh, this is the people we have. This is the stuff we have. Oh, this is the problem that they see. What can we do about that right now?
Mhm,
Maybe
mhm.
I can't solve it all the way. Maybe I can't get to the big thing. Maybe I can't do the giant, expansive thing that'll, in some ways, again, almost feed my ego of like, look at this impressive thing I did. Instead, maybe I just do like a small version. What's the small version? And then if I keep doing the small version long enough, what's interesting is often it eventually becomes a bigger version,
Mhm,
but it
mhm.
becomes one organically, and that there's a need and a desire and a passion there
Mhm.
and interest. So that was one thing around, again, the smaller, like, can we, I also feel like I got better at trying things and failing fast as I got more experience as a leader.
Mhm.
I did not get better that much. I got maybe a little bit better, but not nearly as much as people would think at like just knowing what to do.
Mhm.
Oh, this is what we need to do. Let me plan it all out. Nope. What I got better at is like, oh, okay, well, let's try a few things. Oh, these ones didn't work and that one did. Okay, let's do more of the thing that worked. Oh,
Mhm.
some of them worked even better. Oh, let's do more of that. Look, suddenly I have a functioning team in a much shorter amount of time. So that's one thing. The second one, and this is one that's been on my mind for the last 18 months, is I feel like this is all that God's given me in some ways. And I don't, that sounds bad to me. Let me explain. Um, uh, God says that he will be um, a light to our path and a lamp to our feet.
Mhm.
And I love this when you actually stop and think about it. Because when you just, you're reading through, I think that's in Psalms,
Psalms, yep.
but I'm not sure. So, yeah. When you're reading through that, you sort of, yeah, okay, yep. And then you kind of keep going sometimes. But when I stop, at some point, God made me notice that. And the thing that jumped to me was to that idea you had about like, we wanted to be missionaries in Africa. God doesn't give you, like, just imagine you're in like a foggy place. What do you have? What does God give you? Hey, you see your feet? That's right. You can see your feet. There's the path. Where does the path go? Goes somewhere in the fog. I know where the path goes. I'm God. You don't know where the path goes. There's fog there. What I need you to do is trust that as I put a light to the path and a lamp to your feet, and that's all you see, that you keep walking that path. Um, again, coming back to this idea of the 10-year plan or the giant, like, where's my life going to go and all these different things. I'm not totally against those ideas. I don't mind people having aspirations or visions or dreams or goals or these sorts of stuff. And I think sometimes God gives people those. And especially in that case, like, pursue that, pursue that 10-year goal if you feel it's from God. It might not still go the way you think, but like pursue that if you feel like he's given it to you for sure. Um, so maybe that's how he's working. But often I feel like we want to have that because we want to know what's going to happen. And we feel like when we make the 10-year plan, it's true that they've done the sort of studies on this, that if you make the plan, it's more likely to happen than if you don't have the plan. And that sort of makes sense. But are we willing to go, hey, again, hold this openly, and to your example, the next step, why don't you take the next step? Why don't you deal with, Jesus says, don't worry about what tomorrow will bring for each, basically, I've given you today. Each day has enough troubles of its own. Like, you don't worry about tomorrow. God's got tomorrow. And James says that same thing as we referenced earlier, right? Like, Lord willing, this is what I'll do tomorrow, but I don't know. And there's the rich man who like stores up, he gets even more stuff and he builds the bigger barns. And God's like, you fool, tonight your life will be taken from you. And then who will have your stuff that you thought was the goal? So we have all this stuff of like, we are really called to be present and to look at where the light is and to look at where the lamp is and to take that next step and then let God guide the path through the fog wherever he does. Again, this is very personal to me right now because I'm an entrepreneur who keeps thinking I'm going to run out of resources and have to go find a real job, right? And I keep getting a little bit more runway. And I was just talking to my wife about this last night. I think for a while I've been doing this thing where I'm like, oh, okay, because I made pretty good money when I was in the games industry towards the end of my time there. I wasn't like a millionaire, but I didn't have to worry about most normal expenses. And I could, if I wanted to buy a game or I wanted to buy a little thing for my house or whatever, it was pretty easy. And what's interesting is my brain's almost like, well, that's normal. That's the normal state of affairs. So right now, God's got you going through this dry spell, but like eventually it'll turn around and you'll be back to normal, right? Where like you don't have to. And I had this moment where I was like, what if God leaves me here or even makes this more severe? He might do that. And my plan that I hadn't even thought about, but my assumption that like, oh, I'm just in a moment. And once this moment passes, no. What if this moment is the rest of your life?
What if this is your normal? This is where God wants you
exactly.
Yeah.
This is where God wants you to be. You had that blessing then, you're going to have a new blessing now. And the new blessing now may be that a reliance, a much stronger reliance on God, a much stronger dependence on like, I don't know how I pay for 2 months from now. God seems to have given me enough to get through the next month. And what if he walked that back to the day? But you hear stories about the people that have lived there as Christians in a full faith that God is going to take care of the next day. And what's crazy is he does in miraculous ways. The next day is taken care of. The next day is taken care of. The next day is taken care of. And again, it's almost like they're willing to accept such little assurance, but it's more real then because everything is dependent on God. So anyway, that was just came to mind for me. I love that story that you were telling because I know other people who have that similar thing where I wanted to go be a missionary and instead I ended up doing a business thing. And it's like, well, but to your point, if you followed where God was leading you every step, you're where you should be.
Yep, because that's the clearly one, and that brings us all around in close circle to end this conversation, where we talked about God, the gospel's harshness, and we end with learning how to be content, whatever we think is a harsh environment or a harsh situation. You ended with talking about contentment, where wherever God places you, wherever you follow that light in front of your feet, we need to be content. And
that's hard.
It's hard, right? It's a hard read in the Bible.
Oh my goodness, it's hard.
Awesome.
It's hard.
Any last words, Ben, before we end?
No. Thank you for chatting with me, and I appreciate the time. I hope it was helpful to people out there. And yeah,
I did send you a couple of questions, and we went through just a couple of them because and this is what we love about this podcast is because we start in a certain way. We have a long-term plan, but as we have questions, God brings us to the right place.
The path goes somewhere else.
Yes, the Holy Spirit did us, and I think
that's right.
We talk about some very, very deep stuff, and I love where God has led us in this conversation. So again, Ben, thank you so much.
Jonathan. Yes, you as well. Have a good one.
Yes, you too. Bye bye.